It was 7:15 IMing when Julia opened the email that detonated her entire life. The subject line read, "Moving on." Attached was a photo of her husband, Donald, smiling smugly, his arms wrapped around a young blonde woman in front of their lake house, the same one they'd bought for family getaways. The message was short and cutting. "The house is mine now. I've moved in with Amber. My lawyer will send the divorce papers. Don't bother fighting it. The deed's in my name." Julia stared at the screen, then at her baby daughter Emma, who sat babbling happily in her high chair, blissfully unaware. Instead of crumbling, Julia smiled. Sharp, cold. She typed back, "Are you sure about that? Check the paperwork." Then she blocked Donald's email and turned back to her daughter. "I'm Julia, entrepreneur, mother, and the last woman my husband should have underestimated. Ever been discarded like you were disposable, only to turn that betrayal into fuel?" Julia was 35, living in Nashville, and by all outward appearances had everything: an adorable baby girl, a thriving online retail business, and a husband who seemed charming and successful. She'd built her company from scratch, putting in long hours and making savvy decisions that paid off. It started as a small e-commerce brand, but over the years, Julia turned it into a multi-million-dollar operation focused on sustainable products and ethical sourcing. That level of success didn't come easy, especially while navigating motherhood and marriage. She met Donald 6 years ago at a fundraising gala. He was older by nearly a decade, confident, polished, and worked in corporate finance. At first, he seemed captivated by her ambition and entrepreneurial drive. He claimed to admire her independence and said he'd never met a woman so driven. They married after just a year of dating. On the surface, things were golden. They took weekend trips, hosted elegant dinners, and eventually bought a lake house, a peaceful escape just 2 hours from the city. Julia paid for the lake house entirely using profits from her business. But Donald had insisted that, for tax reasons, the deed should be in his name. He'd brushed away her hesitation with a smile and a slick explanation about deductions and legal structures. Julia relented, but kept meticulous records. She'd always been the one who managed their finances, even helping Donald clean up his own investment portfolio after they married. She trusted him, enough to allow his name on the deed, but not enough to mix their business accounts. Over time, though, cracks began to form. Donald would make offhand comments about her cute side hustle, despite the fact that her company was outperforming most of his corporate clients. He didn't like when she corrected him at dinner parties. He preferred to frame her as a savvy little businesswoman, never a CEO. Julia tried not to let it bother her. She focused on raising their daughter Emma and managing her growing team of employees. Then came the merger. Donald said he was working with a client on a major corporate deal and needed to spend weekends at the lake house to concentrate. At first, Julia supported him. After all, she often worked from different locations herself. But the trips became more frequent. He stayed longer. He grew defensive when she asked questions. She noticed him being secretive with his phone, and when she walked into the home office unexpectedly, he'd minimize browser windows or quickly change screens. When Emma was born, Julia's world shifted. She became laser-focused on building a future for her daughter. She created a trust in Emma's name, kept her company assets completely separate, and opened a college fund using a shared joint account with Donald. That account was supposed to be untouchable, dedicated entirely to Emma's future. Still, Julia ignored the warning signs. She was sleep-deprived, balancing motherhood with board meetings and trying to hold together the image of a happy family. But beneath the surface, her intuition was whispering, something isn't right. She just hadn't realized how right she was, until that morning email arrived. Julia stared at the email titled "Moving On," her stomach churning as she opened the attachment. There was Donald, smiling, arms wrapped around a young blonde woman, posing in front of their lake house like it was some vacation ad. His message was short and smug. "I've moved in with Amber. The house is mine. My lawyer will be sending over the divorce papers. Don't bother fighting it. The deed's in my name." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She blocked his number and email without a second thought. then replied with a single line, "Are you sure about that? You might want to double-check the paperwork." Then she turned her focus to the fact. Julia pulled up the legal documents she'd insisted on when Donald asked to put the deed in his name. The protective clause her lawyer had added was clear. The property was purchased with Julia's business funds, and technically owned by her company. Donald may have his name on the surface, but the real control was hers. Next, she opened her home security app. Cameras installed at the lake house months ago, just in case. There it was. Footage of Donald and Amber lounging by the fireplace, cooking in her kitchen, sleeping in her bed. Julia watched silently, noting every timestamp, every invasion of her space. Then came the Instagram link from Rachel, her assistant. Amber's feed was a highlight reel of betrayal. There were selfies in Julia's robe, posed on her patio. One photo showed Amber wearing Julia's grandmother's diamond ring, the one meant for Emma on her 18th birthday. Another post, dated 8 months ago, read, "Home sweet home with my love." Amber holding the lake house key like she'd earned it. Julia's breath caught in her chest. That was months before Donald's business trips started. Shaking, she logged into their joint bank account, the one meant solely for Emma's college fund. The balance was zero. Nearly $100,000 gone. Transferred out the day before to an account she didn't recognize. Her hands stopped trembling. The rage she'd felt minutes earlier cooled into something sharper. Precision, control, clarity. She stood up, walked to her office, and called her lawyer. "We need to move, now." While they spoke, she began organizing files. Every deed, transaction, email chain proving her ownership of the lake house and company. She downloaded security footage and bookmarked Amber's posts. This wasn't going to be a sob story. This was the start of a strategic counterattack. Donald had no idea who he was up against. Julia sat in her home office, eyes scanning screen after screen of evidence. Rachel had just sent over more screenshots, this time from Amber's private Facebook messages, obtained through a mutual acquaintance. The messages were filled with mockery. Amber bragged about stealing from the clueless wife, and how she and Donald were leveling up while she's still playing shop owner. They even joked about how Julia was too busy playing mom to notice the money disappearing. But the real blow came when Sarah, her attorney, arrived with a flash drive and a frown. "Donald's filed an emergency petition," she said, dropping the drive on Julia's desk. "He's claiming he helped you build your company and wants temporary control over all business accounts until the divorce is settled." Julia stared at her, stunned. "He's trying to take my company?" "He's trying to position himself as the architect of your success," Sarah replied, opening a document on her laptop. "But he's made mistakes." They found them in Donald's email drafts, messages he never sent, saved in a folder he likely forgot about. In one, he complained to a friend, "Julia won't take my advice. She acts like she built the whole thing herself. But the truth? Her company is worth 3 times my salary, and I didn't do a damn thing." There it was, in his own words, a clear contradiction to the legal filing claiming he helped build her business. Sarah copied the emails into a legal brief, highlighting the most damning lines. It didn't stop there. Security footage from the lake house showed Donald removing several pieces of art, pieces Julia had purchased through her business for tax benefits. Sarah leaned in, watching the footage closely. "That's attempted theft of company property," she said. "He doesn't just lose the house. This could turn criminal if we frame it right." Julia nodded, mind racing. Each new piece of evidence formed a bigger, darker picture. And Rachel burst into the office, tablet in hand. "Look at this," she said, swiping to a document she'd uncovered from Donald's cloud account. It was a draft of an internal announcement. Donald was being promoted to chief financial officer at his company, effective in 3 weeks. The timing aligned perfectly with the betrayal. Julia blinked, gears turning. "He's not just leaving me. He's securing power. Using this to clean house before he steps up." "And Amber?" Sarah asked. "She's the CEO's niece," Rachel confirmed. "This was never just an affair. It was a calculated move. Julia's breath caught in her throat. Her business, known for ethical practices and fair labor, was one of Donald's company's biggest emerging competitors. If he became CFO, he'd gain access to insider information, client lists, and upcoming strategies. The divorce, the house, the funds, it was all a distraction. He was trying to bury her before she could pose a threat. Not just personal betrayal, this was corporate warfare. And Julia? She was just getting started. Julia sat at her desk, the morning sun casting long streaks across the hardwood floor. Rachel stood beside her, pale and furious, tablet in hand. "It's confirmed," she said, voice low but urgent. "Donald tried accessing your business servers from the lake house. Multiple times. We traced the IP addresses. They matched the location exactly." Julia's stomach clenched. "So he wasn't just stealing from our family. He's committing corporate espionage." Rachel nodded grimly. "And he wasn't subtle. He tried logging in just 2 hours after sending you that email, like he thought he'd get away with it." Julia turned to Sarah, who was already at her laptop, fingers flying. "We need to prepare everything. For the board, the press. If he gets that CFO position, he'll bury my company." "No, he won't," Sarah said firmly. "You've got leverage. More than you know." Julia stood and walked to the wall safe in her office. She pulled out a small hard drive and handed it to Sarah. "This is everything. I call it the insurance file. Years of records. Emails, account transfers, investment irregularities. Stuff Donald thought I didn't notice, while I managed our finances." Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the drive's contents. "This is gold." Then the security feed buzzed. Julia tapped it open on her monitor. The lake house came into view. Live footage from the living room. Donald, Amber, and Robert, the CEO of Donald's company, were gathered, with champagne flutes, laughing and clinking glasses. "To the future CFO," Robert toasted. Donald smirked. "And to my beautiful fiancé, who made all this possible," Amber giggled, brushing her hand along his arm. "Tomorrow, the board signs off on the audit and her accounts are ours. She won't know what hit her." Julia watched with cold detachment, her hand tightening into a fist. "That's enough," she said. She motioned to Sarah. "Send the email, all of it. The files, the security footage, the bank transfer logs, the server access attempts. Everything." Sarah hit send. For a few moments, silence. Then the security feed captured movement. Robert's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and paled. "Emergency board meeting?" he said aloud, confusion mounting in his voice. "What the hell is this?" Donald looked over his shoulder. "What's going on?" Robert shook his head. "Someone just sent the board a full report. Accusations of fraud, insider trading, asset theft. Julia's name is all over it." Donald pulled out his own phone and began scrolling. No, she doesn't have this kind of reach." "She does?" Julia whispered from her office, watching it all unfold. Amber's phone buzzed next. She gasped. "They have screenshots from my Facebook. They've seen the messages." Julia crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. Her home, her business, her family. They had tried to take it all, but now their champagne celebration was turning into panic. Sarah smiled as she watched Donald pace frantically on the screen. "Checkmate." Julia nodded. "They made one mistake," she said quietly. "They underestimated a woman who built her empire from nothing. While raising a child, managing a household, and protecting every asset they thought they could steal. The war was no longer private. It had just gone public, and Julia was holding every card." Julia sat back in her office chair, eyes fixed on the live feed from the lake house. The champagne celebration had turned into chaos. Robert was barking into his phone, pacing back and forth. Donald stood motionless, reading something on his phone screen, his face drained of color. Amber was crying, her mascara smeared, phone buzzing with message after message. Sarah leaned over. "That would be the Facebook messages." Julia nodded. "Good. Every board member got them?" Every single one. Screenshots of Amber mocking you, bragging about the scheme, the photos in your clothes, and her boasting about helping Donald steal information. The doorbell rang at the lake house. On screen, they all froze. Moments later, uniformed officers stepped into view. The feed picked up Robert's shocked voice. "There must be a mistake. This is private property." One of the officers held up a warrant. "We have authorization for search and detainment. Step aside." Amber backed away in tears. Donald tried to argue, but the officer simply repeated, "You have the right to remain silent," and began cuffing him. Sarah exhaled sharply. That's attempted fraud, corporate espionage, and misuse of marital assets. He's going to be busy with criminal defense for a long time. Julia didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched as the man who had tried to take everything from her was walked out of the house he thought he owned. A few hours later, confirmation emails poured in. Sarah read one aloud. "The board has voted unanimously to cancel Donald's promotion. Robert has been placed on administrative leave pending a formal investigation." "And Amber?" Julia asked. "Disgraced. The niece connection backfired. The board is furious that she was involved in corporate strategy meetings without clearance." Rachel looked up from her laptop. "Oh, and guess what? The CEO's past misconduct just surfaced in a whistleblower report linked to Amber's access. It's all unraveling." That afternoon, Julia's attorney received court approval to reassign the deed of the lake house back to her. Documentation proving she had purchased the home with her business profits had held up. Donald's name had been on the title for tax reasons, but it was legally meaningless. By evening, Julia's phone was flooded with messages from investors. Her ethical brand, already known for its integrity and transparency, had suddenly become a beacon in an industry riddled with scandal. One email stood out. A major investor wrote, "If this is how you defend your company under fire, we want in." Sarah smiled as she read the notice. "You've got full control of all marital assets now. The court reviewed everything. They ruled in your favor across the board." Julia nodded. "And the money?" Rachel grinned. "Recovered. The offshore accounts were frozen the minute the fraud charges hit. With penalties, we're getting back even more than was stolen." Julia turned toward the window, looking out at the late afternoon sun casting golden light across her backyard. Emma was playing with a stuffed elephant, giggling as Rachel's dog chased her around in circles. Everything was falling into place. Donald would face charges for attempting to defraud both Julia and her company. His attempts to sabotage her had backfired spectacularly. His promotion was gone, his job was hanging by a thread, and his reputation in finance was scorched beyond repair. Robert, the CEO, had not only lost his position, but was under federal scrutiny for facilitating a scheme that threatened one of the few ethical competitors in the field. Amber had become the face of nepotism gone wrong. Publicly mocked, privately humiliated. She disappeared from social media within hours of the board's emergency meeting. Rumors swirled that she'd returned to Ohio to live with her parents. And Julia? She was stronger than ever. The lake house was officially hers, the money was back, her business was surging, and she'd just been offered a keynote speaker spot at a national women's leadership conference. As Sarah closed her laptop and stood to leave, she paused at the door. "You know," she said, "I've had a lot of clients face betrayal, but not many turn it into a masterclass in power." Julia smiled faintly. "Donald thought he could erase me with one email, but all he did was remind me exactly who I am." In the days following Donald's arrest, his world collapsed with brutal efficiency. The charges, attempted fraud, corporate espionage, misuse of marital assets, spread like wildfire through the financial community. His firm issued a public statement distancing themselves, and within a week, Donald's name was blacklisted across corporate finance circles. Recruiters stopped returning his calls. Emails went unanswered. The title CFO became a ghost of an ambition that would never be realized. Donald tried to reach out, first to Sarah, then to Rachel, and finally to Julia herself. Each time he sent long-winded apologies, blaming stress, ambition, even misguided love. Julia never replied. She didn't even read past the subject lines. Each message was immediately archived in a folder labeled irrelevant. Ember, once so bold in her Instagram captions, vanished from the public eye. Her social media accounts were scrubbed clean. Her influencer brand collapsed overnight. With her ties to Robert now toxic and her involvement in the corporate espionage scandal exposed, no firm would touch her. Last anyone heard, she'd moved back to Ohio to live with her parents. The headlines had dubbed her the niece who nuked a corporation. But the fallout didn't end there. The board launched an internal investigation into Robert's tenure. What began as a scandal involving a single executive ballooned into a full-blown corporate reckoning. Years of shady dealings, hush payments, and misappropriated funds came to light. Executives resigned en masse. Shareholders demanded reform. The company's reputation took a hit that would take years to recover. In contrast, Julia's star rose. Journalists called her fearless. Commentators praised her for standing her ground in a landscape where women were often told to shrink, to forgive, to move on quietly. Instead, she'd held the line. And because of that, she wasn't just the woman who fought back. She became the woman who exposed something far bigger. Her company, built on values of transparency, fair labor, and ethical production, saw an explosion of interest. Orders doubled, then tripled. Customers posted online with the hashtag Julia was right. Retailers reached out to partner. Julia's face appeared in business magazines, not as someone caught in a tabloid scandal, but as a visionary CEO who had defended her legacy and won. She took the lake house and turned it into a family retreat. The art that Donald had tried to steal was returned, now hanging in the great room. Quiet trophies of battles won. Emma's playroom looked out over the lake. It was their sanctuary now, a place to build new memories untouched by betrayal. And Donald? He lost everything he tried to steal, and more. The court ruled he was to have no access to Emma's trust fund. His visitation rights were restricted to supervised sessions once a month, contingent on continued good behavior and completion of counseling. He didn't contest it. The fight had drained him, and more than that, he knew he had already lost the only thing that mattered. Julia, for the first time in years, felt light. No more walking on eggshells. No more tiptoeing around a fragile ego. No more pretending to be smaller than she was to make someone else feel bigger. She had her company, her daughter, her peace. She walked through her home with confidence now, knowing every inch of it was hers, paid for, protected, and fought for. One afternoon, as Emma played nearby, Julia opened her email and saw another message from Donald. This one simply read, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." She deleted it without opening it, then shut her laptop, walked outside, and joined Emma in the sunshine. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's living so fully, so freely, they can't touch you anymore. With the settlement finalized, Julia used a portion of her company's surplus funds to buy out Donald's remaining stake in every joint asset. No lingering ties, no legal gray areas, just clean, absolute ownership of the lake house, the vehicles, and even their former vacation investments. It was the final page of a chapter that no longer defined her. She walked through the lake house one evening, barefoot on the freshly refinished hardwood floors. The space no longer whispered of betrayal, it radiated purpose. Julia had renovated every inch, transforming it into a serene retreat designed for single mothers in business. A place where women like her could come to recharge, strategize, and feel seen. Each room was named after a quality she had to reclaim: resolve, faith, independence. And upstairs, in what used to be the master suite, hung a single framed photo. Donald's original moving on email, printed in large black font, sealed behind glass, and titled in gold beneath, "Wrong Woman." Emma thrived in this new chapter. Surrounded by love, structure, and stories of resilience, she grew curious and bold. Julia made sure her daughter understood that ambition wasn't selfish. It was survival. And generosity wasn't weakness. It was power. Julia's business expanded into 3 new international markets within a year. Her unique combination of ethical sourcing and unapologetic entrepreneurship became a beacon for disillusioned customers worldwide. Investors now sought her out, asking to learn from the woman who'd not only built an empire, but protected it under fire. She began speaking at conferences and corporate events, her story inspiring thousands. Topics ranged from asset protection for female founders to ethical leadership in a cutthroat world. She didn't shy away from sharing her mistakes, but she never let those define her. They were fuel, not shame. She partnered with women-led organizations to launch mentorship programs and funding initiatives for underserved female entrepreneurs. The Lake House became the hub, hosting weekend strategy sessions, boot camps, and fireside wine chats about how to survive in a world that often overlooked and underestimated women. At every keynote, she began with the same story, the email that started it all. She never read the full message again. It wasn't worth it. But the subject line lived forever, etched into her memory and her mission. Moving on. It had been meant as a dismissal, an announcement of victory from a man who thought she would crumble. Instead, it became her mantra, her pivot, her permission to build something bigger than either of them had imagined. Because reinvention doesn't mean starting over. It means taking back everything that was stolen from you and turning it into something stronger, something that can't be touched. Julia didn't just move on. She rose, and the world took notice. 1 year later, the lake house looked nothing like it had the day Julia opened that email. Now, it was warm, lived in, alive. Julia stood barefoot on the deck, a gentle breeze coming off the water as the sun painted gold across the surface. Behind her, the soft clinking of wind chimes. In front of her, Emma laughed as she chased bubbles across the lawn, her curls bouncing with every step. The only sound louder than her daughter's giggles was the quiet peace in Julia's heart. She lifted her teacup, steam curling upward, and glanced at the wall behind the sliding glass door, where a single framed document hung like a trophy. The subject line, "Moving on." Julia smiled, not bitterly, not even triumphantly, just no. "He tried to take everything I'd built," she murmured, sipping her tea. "Instead, he handed me the fuel to build more." She watched Emma spin in circles, arms open wide to the sky, unburdened, free. "This is our house now," Julia whispered. "And we are just getting started." No pain lingered, no fear remained, only purpose, grounded in everything she'd survived and everything she was still becoming. Because the best revenge isn't anger, it's peace and power.